Our title tonight, What Hope for the Economy? The Crisis of Capitalism and How to Deal with It. We have about an hour and 40 minutes to answer that question. And we hear quite a lot about crises, and some of it is not always clear. I think I heard our friend Eric Hobsbawm on Newsnight suggesting we're running out of work. I, at the same time, hear people we're running out of welfare, running out of government and public and private services. Surely both can't be true. You hear people talk of China and the shifting balance of power in the world as a crisis for the West, although in some respects we should probably think of that as being one of the great successes of the modern era. But it's absolutely clear we are at a difficult and interesting juncture, and we're all over the place in terms of making sense of it. So let's see if we can make sense of it tonight. Now, the proposal is we divide this into 3 sessions. We'll have some panel discussion, and then we'll open up to the floor, and then we'll go back to the panel for sort of a second section, come back to the floor. So what are the 3 sections that we might divide this complicated topic into? First of all, the macroeconomic crisis, which really deals with the fact that we are in a recession, depression, rather flatlining economy, not just in the UK, but in the West. We thought Keynes had cracked the problem of how you get out of that kind of situation. But with public debt levels as high as they are, it turns out to be more complicated than that, or does it? So everything to do with macroeconomics will be the sort of first subject tonight. We'll talk about austerity and growth. We'll talk about global or UK rebalancing, whether we have the tools to do the job, and whether we are ready for them, to use them. The second chunk, which might, I think, be quite a substantial one, is what I would call the microeconomic crisis, about the functioning of our economy, not about the interest rates and fiscal policy and monetary policy, but about the way our markets function or dysfunction. Does the financial sector, for example, serve the economy well or badly, just to take a random example? In some respects, the real crisis of capitalism, it could be argued, is that business models have been allowed to succeed, which have failed. Failed business models have been allowed to succeed, and people who contribute rather little have been able to take big returns. Lastly, and perhaps most interestingly, the third section is the Eurozone crisis. Now, this one is special. It's like the climax of one of those endurance game shows where it gets harder as you go along, like Gladiator, and it all hinges at the end on the last round. And the Euro crisis is like that because it combines the other 2 crises we've talked about. Clearly, there's a macroeconomic crisis of coping with austerity at the same time as wanting growth. At root in the Eurozone, we have the microeconomic crisis, because in some respects it was the functioning of the banks that allowed debt imbalances to accumulate. And then at the same time, just to make it all the more exciting, policymakers have taken away all the tools of flexible economic management that you might have had at your disposal for dealing with those problems, like exchange rates, German fiscal policy, and central banking. So that's, if you like, where we'll finish. We'll sort of cope with the Eurozone crisis at the very end. So let me briefly introduce the panel, and we'll get down to business. I'll start at that end. Thomas Frank, American journalist, historian, author of a forthcoming book, Pity the Billionaire, which, as I understand it, Thomas suggests the right have pulled off a fast one, really, in getting the blame for the current woes directed at governments rather than at other more suitable culprits. I think you started out as a college Republican, didn't you? And you switched. You're not seen as that now. Next to Thomas is Diane Coyle. I should say, by the way, I'm actually going to introduce each of them by book titles. It's just a sort of way of doing it. I won't give their CVs. I'll just tell you their latest book. Diane Coyle, economist and managing director of Enlightened Economics, and author of The Economics of Enough, How to Run the Economy as If the Future Matters. Next to Diane, Sir Martin Jacomb, a person for whom the phrase city grandee was invented, chairman of the Canary Wharf Group until 2011, former chairman of Barclays, Dazoo Wed and Prudential, and had been on the court of the Bank of England as well for some years. I'm afraid Sir Martin actually hasn't written a book, as I reckon. Have you written a book, Martin? You don't. I think Martin's the only one who hasn't got a book to peddle here tonight. Next to Sir Martin, Anatole Kaletsky, who's the principal economic commentator of The Times, who not so long ago wrote Capitalism 4.0, which set out some principles for the capitalism that would follow from Capitalism 2.0 and 3.0, which were the Keynesian and more Thatcherite versions. Principles in that book. Next to Anatole is John Kay, economist, FT columnist, author of quite a few books, The Truth About Markets, among them, and another one with a very long title about finance, Finance for the Intelligent Layman. What was it?
For normally intelligent people who are not in the industry.
That was it. You don't have to remember all of it to find it on Amazon. Next to John is Stephen King, who is Group Chief Economist at HSBC. Stephen's recent book was called Losing Control, The Emerging Threats to Western Prosperity, and it was scary enough, in fact, for this Stephen King to be confused with the other Stephen King, the horror writer. And next to Stephen, we have Linda Yu, economist, broadcaster, economics editor at Bloomberg TV, a fellow at Oxford as well, and co-authored Macroeconomics, which I believe is a recommended textbook for the UK Government Economic Service. Read into that what you will. And is also a co-author of the Economy of China, Globalization and Economic Growth in China. And right at the end, Gideon Rachman, Chief Foreign Affairs Commentator for the Financial Times, and whose most recent book, is called Zero-Sum World, which I think argues that we are moving into a zero-sum world.